Shabbat Shalom. So I think the handouts are circulating. I want to try to make sure that I'm audible to all those listening online and all those who are here. And yes, so obviously Rabbi Leibovitz is on vacation, and that's what brings me to this particular moment with all of you. And it is wonderful, and I'm glad that Cantor Schatz, you reflected on my being here earlier as a rabbinic intern. One of the things that Rabbi Leibovitz does in this community that I always appreciate is that sometimes on Shabbat mornings, we take the time to hear the rabbi or the rabbinic intern give a drash, and sometimes we take time to learn some Torah together. And this Torah that we're going to learn together is something that I learned for the first time in Jerusalem when I was studying at the conservative yeshiva, so has a particular emotional connection, and I think it's just super interesting. So we're gonna dive in. We have a couple of Midrashim, and it's all on the topic of Bilam, this guy who heard his donkey talk to him. Oh, there we go. We're doing it. Oh, perfect. I am not good with the technology, so I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm like, where does it go? We're making it work. It's good. So Bilam is this character in the Torah, this person who is a prophet. He has this conversation with his donkey, which is very memorable. But I think the most interesting thing about Bilam is that, so he's a prophet. He's not a Jew. He's not part of the Jewish people, but he does believe in God, and he follows the instructions of God. And so what does this mean exactly? What does this look like? So we're going to hear a couple of different opinions on who this guy is, who is Bilam, and what is he all about. So we'll read this first midrash from Sifrei Devarim, and this midrash is actually starting its commentary on the death of Moses, but soon we pivot and we talk about Bilam. So here we go. All right, so, and there shall not arise in Israel again a prophet such as Moses. V'lo kam navi b'Yisrael kamoshe. And we read that at the end of the book of Deuteronomy as we're reflecting on the life of Moses. There's never going to be a prophet in Israel as great as Moses. But, continues our midrash, among the nations there did arise. Okay, so Moses is this great prophet in the Jewish people, but now the midrash is saying there are other great prophets that aren't in the Jewish people. Kind of surprising. And who was he? Who is this great prophet, as great as Moses, that arose among the nations and was not Jewish? Bilam, the son of Beor. Wait a second. You know, at least for me, the most memorable thing is the talking donkey, not the great prophecy. In fact, in the Parsha, Bilam ends up looking a little bit ridiculous because he gets hired to curse the Jewish people and ends up blessing them. So he's a great prophet? Really? Okay, but we're going to read more, and this midrash takes a few interesting turns. There is a difference, the midrash says, between the prophecy of Moses and the prophecy of Bilam. Okay, maybe they were both great, but they weren't exactly the same. So Moses did not know who was speaking to him, and Bilam did know. And we have this quote to prove it, the speech of the hearer Bilam of the words of the Almighty. So I think that the way that the proof works is a little bit obscure, but we have this idea that Moses didn't know who was speaking to him when God was speaking to him, but Bilam did know, which makes it seem like, at least to me, upon first glance, Bilam is an even greater prophet than Moses. Really? Really? Isn't Moses the greatest ever? But okay, we'll read on and we'll hear some more. So Moses did not know when God would speak to him until God did so, and Bilam did know, as it says, the knower of the knowledge of the Most High. So this is also a comment that might make it seem like Bilam was a greater prophet than Moses, because Moses, you know, when God reached out to Moses was like, oh my gosh, it's great to hear from you, but I didn't know you were going to call on the cell phone. But Bilam is like, okay, God's going to call me at 3 o'clock. I'm going to be ready. We're going to have this phone conference. It's going to be great. So, okay, what is that? It makes me think, what is that relationship like? You know, when you have someone who calls you, a friend who calls you when they feel like it, versus maybe a colleague who you schedule the phone call and then you make the appointment in time. So what is this saying about the relationship between Moses and God? What is this saying about the relationship between Bilam and God? Who is the greater prophet? The midrash isn't over, so we're going to read a little bit more. Okay, then we have Moses did not speak with God unless he was standing, as it says in the book of Devarim, and you here stand with me. But Bilam spoke with God when he was fallen. As it says, the vision of the Almighty shall he see fallen and his eyes uncovered. So this is where things, I think, start to take a turn. Instead of it being unclear who was the greater prophet, maybe it was Moses, but maybe it was Bilam. Now we're hearing from the Midrash a more conclusive statement. Moses spoke with God when he was standing up, and Bilam spoke with God when he was fallen. So Moses and God have this relationship where they're looking at each other, seeing eye to eye in a way. They're communicating face to face, standing up. And when Bilam was speaking with God, he was fallen over. So God was really in charge. Bilam was just taking instructions, whereas Moses and God have more of a communication, more of that sort of back and forth relationship, which I think makes Moses the greatest prophet that ever lived in the Jewish people. So this final comment about the nature of Bilam and Bilam's relationship with God: to whom may he, meaning Bilam, be compared? To the king's cook, who knows the expenses of the royal table. And I love this: to the king's cook who knows the expenses of the royal table. So what is this like? It makes me think of the first time I went to a tax preparer to get my taxes done instead of trying to do them myself. And I have this person that I'm meeting for the first time who's asking me a whole bunch of personal questions about my money, which is sort of odd. You know, here is this person that I don't have a friendship with, and they know things about me that no one else knows. Or kind of like going to the doctor. Our doctors know things about us that our friends don't know, but it's not really a relationship between equals. And so for Bilam has this intimate connection with God, but it's not like a connection between two friends. It's like the connection between someone and their cook. You know, I know how much salt you like in your soup. I know if you don't like the spicy, but you do like the sweet. But it's not really a relationship between equals. It's more of a servant relationship. So we see here in this Midrash that perhaps Bilam was a great prophet, as great as Moses, but he still didn't have that same relationship with God. He was a great servant. And this is why he gets hired to curse the Jewish people, but he's such a great servant of God that he can't help it. Only blessings come out of his mouth. Super interesting. So this is the one that I learned in Israel, but it made me so curious about Bilam and what the Midrash has to say that I did some more learning on it, and so we'll read on the back. Okay. So these two we'll go through a little bit more quickly, and that'll bring us to the end of our learning together. The first one is kind of the backstory on how did Bilam grow up. So we read, okay, and he sent messengers to Bilam ben Beor at Petor. Petor was the name of his city. Okay, so Bilam ben Beor is from Petor. But others say that the name implies he was a money changer. Since Petor in Aramaic denotes a table, these interpreters would read the clause, interpret it this way, and he sent messengers to Bilam ben Beor at a money changer's table. So we could interpret this to mean that Bilam was from Petor, or we could interpret this to mean that before Bilam was a prophet, he worked as a money changer. He just had a regular job, which I think is very interesting. Since the kings of the nations of the world, and we're continuing in the Midrash, took counsel with him as the money changer to whom they would all show their coins. So interesting that I was talking before about a relationship between a person and their tax preparer, their financial advisor. It's a close relationship in a certain particular way. And so Bilam kind of built up his fame, built up his reputation by being involved with a bunch of important people and their money. And that's, you know, if you do a good job with that, you end up building a lot of trust. And so that's kind of like how Bilam made his way into the profession of prophecy. And so let's hear another interpretation. Still others say that in the beginning, Bilam was an interpreter, poter, of dreams. He turned to being a diviner, then he turned to the Holy Spirit. So maybe we're learning that he's from Petor, and the Midrash is all about multiple interpretations. Maybe he's from Petor, maybe he's a money changer, and maybe he's an interpreter of dreams, you know. But either way, whichever these three stories about his origin we want to interpret, or maybe all three of them, he turned to being a diviner, then he turned to the Holy Spirit. So there was a time in Bilam's life when he didn't have a relationship with God. He was just working, hanging out with important people, trying to earn a living, but then eventually he had this connection with God, and that brought him into prophecy. But okay, so I love this finish because it, at least for me, it makes that final statement about how do we really feel about Bilam? Is he a great prophet or not so much? Okay. Then God said unto Bilam, you shall not go with them. Bilam said to him, if so, I will curse them from where I am. And this is directly quoting from our Parsha. So God said to Bilam, you shall not curse the people. And so Bilam says to God, if so, let me bless them. But God says to Bilam, they don't need your blessing, for they are blessed. The Jewish people doesn't need to be blessed by Bilam. We're already blessed by God. We don't need Bilam. Similarly, one says to a hornet, none of your honey and none of your sting. So maybe our actual feeling about Bilam is he can do some great things. He can bless the Jewish people. He gives us this wonderful text of Ma tovu ahalecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael, this blessing for the Jewish homes and how amazing they were. But we'll take it. Why not? Well, we don't need him. We're blessed by God because we're Jewish. And there can be great nations in the world. We can benefit from them, but really what's primary is our relationship with God. So thank you all for taking the time to learn this Midrash with me, and we're going to continue with our Musaf service led by Cantor Schatz.